I just abruptly stopped. All right, off topic here with Randy Zellea. My guest, a good friend today, Rick Laughland. He's been everywhere. He's been with pretty much everywhere. And Rick, I thanks for joining the show today. I really appreciate you give me a few minutes on this beautiful fall day. We're mid October, and Giants football doesn't seem to be relevant. Jets football doesn't seem to be relevant, and we don't have any NBA on the horizon. So otherwise, there's really not a lot going on. So what's going on, brother?
Yeah, that intro video kind of reminded me of Joe Judge's tenure as the Giants coach, right? I mean, it came in, it had such a promising start to it. You thought it was going to be some powerful message, and then it fizzed out. But I know, Randy, you're not necessarily as pessimistic as I am about the Giants, even though you just admitted before the show you are pessimistic. I think there are going to be some, let's call it wholesale changes, but of course not related to Joe Judge. I think that Dave Gettleman and his time and days as the Giants general manager are numbered. But again, this is what now 6 games into Joe Judge's tenure as head coach, and you can't really judge a first-year coach on a 1-5 record. But again, I think things have to change and change in a hurry for Daniel Jones and company if they hope to salvage Dave Gettleman's job as the GM.
Well, I look at everything 200% differently than that aspect of it. I do not think you can kill Dave Gettleman for this situation that's going on with the New York Giants. I really don't. I think that right now, I've said this to you privately. You can't kill Gettleman for not having a spring, like basically revamping the show. So he's revamping everything. He's revamping the offensive line. He's revamping the defense. You have a second-year quarterback. You have a wide receiving core. It doesn't exactly have a lot of number ones, but has a bunch of number 2 guys in there. You have a all-pro running back who ended up getting hurt. But the reality is you had no spring when you have a new coach and a new system that has to be implemented. You don't have a preseason. You have a limited training camp. So basically everybody is learning as they go with the new coach, new system. Everyone's getting comfortable with each other. And I've always said the first 4 games of the year is a feel out period of what a team is going to be for the season. I always use this as an example. I don't remember it was the 2016 or the 2017 Philadelphia Eagles when Carson Wentz came in and they started the season 3-1 and they finished 4-12. You know what I mean? The first
Right.
4 games, first 4 games of the season, it's a crapshoot. You start seeing what teams are usually around the 5th or 6th game of the season.
Yeah, and I think that was Carson Wentz's rookie year. We started 3-0, 4-1, of course, and there was all optimism around Philadelphia. I think Wentzylvania was the nickname, right? And then, of course, we know the Nick Foles Super Bowl run and the recent struggles of Carson Wentz. To me, Randy, I mean, we talked about this. I really think that the NFC East is going to be 7 wins is going to be enough to win the division. I still think my preseason prediction, even though, believe me, the Mike McCarthy hiring doesn't look terrific, I still think the Cowboys probably at 7-9 are going to win this division. Whether they make it deep into the playoffs, I question that. But I still think a sub 500 record is going to be enough to win the NFC East. And for me, again, Gettleman, am I going to kill him for drafting Saquon Barkley? Absolutely not. I think Barkley, he mentioned at that pick, remember that was the year, of course, that Sam Darnold was drafted by the Jets, and the Giants had an opportunity to take him among other quarterbacks and elected to take Barkley, who grew up a Jet fan. There was the whole preseason with his father, who was raised him as a Jet fan, said the father was going to wear a Wayne Corbett jersey. There was all that fun give and take going on. But realistically, I think Barkley ultimately is going to be a gold jacket guy. The problem is physicality at the position, just the way he's built his lower body. He's just taken such a pounding. I think his career trajectory as far as staying healthy is more Marion Barber-esque than it is Tiki Barber-esque or any of the guys that maybe be in the rushing, Hall of Fame, so to speak. So again, for me, am I going to kill Dave Gettleman and go down the list of his drafts and say he's done a terrible job? Absolutely not. I think that when, of course, Daniel Jones was taken, there was so much criticism and negativity that was surrounding that. And despite some untimely turnovers, obviously some growing pains now in his second year, I think a lot of defenses are adjusting to his playing style. here's a quarterback that broke out for a 50-yard rush that was just incredible. A guy that when you look at him and you see him move in the pocket, doesn't necessarily look like he's going to have that escapability a la Russell Wilson. But boy, oh boy, when he has to turn it up and kick in those afterburners, he can do that. So again, if I'm a Giant fan, I've seen the body of work of Dave Gettleman. I like the pieces that are coming together. My concern is that it's just, as you mentioned, Randy, whether it's a product of a shortened spring, whether this roster needs some more marinated a little bit more, and to understand Joe Judge's philosophy and the offensive system. I think that's all a part of it. But I think at 70 some odd years of age, I just don't see Dave Gettleman being around to see this process through.
Which is an absolute shame because he's done a really good job of. Now it's starting to look like the pieces are starting to gel together, and that's the scary part of it. It looks. Andrew Thomas's non-start for this week was more of a discipline thing. It's not that he's doing a bad job of performance for the team whatsoever. The defense has played very, very, very well. And I think it took a little while for Daniel Jones and Jason Garrett to get on the same page on how to feature certain players in this offense. But Daniel Jones and Darius Slayton play very, very well together. They have to get Golden Tate more involved. They're starting to get Evan Ingram involved in the passing game as well. Devontae Freeman is starting to look like Atlanta Devontae Freeman now in this offense. So it's starting to come together. And I'm telling you right now, if they come back out here right now and win and go 8-8 the rest of the way, they finish off with 8-8, this is a successful season. I think 7-9. I think 7-9 is a successful season.
Absolutely. And, I was in the building. I think you were as well. 2013, Tom Coughlin head coach. They basically narrowly avoided another 0-6 start, which would have been the first time since that 2013 season. You can thank Riverboat Ron for that gamble going for 2 at the end of the game, which I thought, frankly, a lot of people are questioning why he did it. I questioned the play call more so than the decision, frankly. And you correct me if I'm wrong, Randy, the way that game was going, I was not confident as a Giant fan. Even if they got the ball, they're going to go down and score a touchdown. That's probably going to be a field goal battle, or Washington probably had a chance to win it in overtime. So I'm curious to get your thoughts, because I question the play call, but I know a lot of people are questioning even going for 2 in that instance.
I didn't question the play. I didn't question the decision to go for it. I think when you're on the road, you go for the win. When you're home, you go for the tie, because then you have the home field advantage. I questioned the play call like you did, and I just would have run it, to be honest with you. Giants couldn't stop the run at that point. And look, it happens. Again, they got out of there by the skin of their teeth. They just as easily could have gone the other way, and that's the sign of a growing team. Again, you're not losing, you're learning, and I think that's the hard thing. Man, I feel bad for Evan Ingram, because all he's been doing is learning, if that's the thought. That's the thought process. Only 4 players remain from that 2017 McAdoo era: Dalvin Tomlinson, Sterling Shepard, Evan Ingram, and Wayne Gallman. That's it. The last 4 guys. So you don't have a lot of offensive line and defensive guys there. So those are the guys you're supposed to build your team around.
And that was actually my next point, Randy, is that I was in the building, started covering the Giants really on a part-time basis in 2010 and full-time in 2013. So I was there for, let's call it, the down years, which you could still make the argument they're still trying to pull out of. But 2013, the 0-6 start, Jerry Reese, who, again, the Giants are a team historically, much like the Pittsburgh Steelers, have had a handful of GMs in the history of the franchise, along with head coaches. And Jerry Reese's real undoing in New York was he forgot the identity of the team that was that offensive line, that physicality up front, protecting Eli Manning, the hard-nosed ground and pound style of football, and then, of course, the vaunted defensive line with Umenyiora and Justin Tuck, and of course Jason Pierre-Paul, and the list goes on and on. And what Jerry Reese did is he fell in love and was just dazzled by the skill positions you mentioned: Evan Ingram, Sterling Shepard. He started trying to basically create this high octane offense, but was neglecting the most important component of it that was critical to Eli Manning at the latter stage of his career, that was basically a sedentary stand in the pocket statue of a quarterback. And when protection broke down in front of him, we saw time and time again, Eli just had no support up front. The defensive line didn't apply pressure, and they really failed to get back to square one and start building that core philosophy around the trenches on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. And I think that Dave Gettleman refocused that organizational philosophy as a whole by revamping the scouting department, reshifting the focus of the organization. So I'll give him all the credit in the world for that. And like you said, Randy, maybe the results aren't there. Maybe they're not a 9-10 win team at this point. But when you look at the quality of football they've played so far this year, even though they are now 1-5, when I go back to that 0-6 season, and even though Tom Coughlin, a two-time Super Bowl winning coach, you could just see how that offensive and defensive lines were just deteriorating due to old age, injury, and attrition, a number of different factors. And now you have the exact opposite. You have some young Andrew Thomas, you mentioned. You have some young up-and-coming players that look like they haven't even scratched the surface of their potential. So I think they're good times ahead. Like I said, unfortunately for Dave Gettleman, he's not, in the early stage of his career. He's basically making the turn on 17, heading to 18, and I don't see him seeing this whole process through.
Well, and the funny thing is, you just said that too with younger players. Like, that's where I feel the major difference from 2013, 2014, 2015. 16, they made the playoffs. And of course, 2017 and 2018, when Gettleman was there, 2018, 2019, when Gettleman was there, is the difference is you actually feel with the losses, this is not a major alarming situation. Whereas there's no expectation to win right now. If any Giant fan went into this season with the expectation of winning, then we need to have another type of conversation with those Giants fans, because this is just, it's not the opportunity and the time to start talking about winning. Not when you have a second year quarterback who still has problems holding onto the football, a stud running back who now for the second season is out with injury, which is very concerning. But you have a star tight end who has not played a full 16 game season yet. You have a wide receiver who's hit the injury bug in Sterling Shepard. You have Darius Slayton, who's hobbling right now, but has shown through his first two seasons that he's going to be a key contributor. I do not look at him as a number one receiver. I look at him as like an Amani Toomer type of player, where he's going to be steady, going to get you, 5-6 catches a game and get you a touchdown a game. Still don't look at him as a number one. And then you have Golden Tate, who's always been a number two wide receiver in the NFL. So those positions, where each one of those has their own set of questions, but there's no expectation on that core to give you wins right away.
Yeah, and you look at sorry, go ahead.
No, I was about to say, and the expectation level in New York is always so high that there's no rebuilding in New York. But in this situation, you have to rebuild. Sometimes you have to take the whole boat apart to put it back together instead of just plugging holes. And the last one of those holes, the final piece of the puzzle you had to break off was Eli Manning. And once Eli Manning was gone, the expectation level of trying to go out there and win games and make the playoffs goes out the window for at least 3 to 4 years.
And that's exactly right. I mean, it felt like those final few years you mentioned with Tom Coughlin, 2015, 2016, that the clock was ticking not only the head coach, but these were the final years of Eli Manning as a quarterback. So really the attitude of the front office, and that emanated down to the fan base, was they want to do everything in their power to give Eli specifically and Tom Coughlin one more chance at it, one more championship run. And they could never seem to put that together because, again, it was failed draft strategy. It was trying to get the shiny pieces instead of taking care. They were trying to put basically gold siding on a house where the foundation was crumbling, is the way I look at it. And the idea of these Giants championship teams, whether you go back to 86, 1990, the 2017, 2011, yes, they had Plexico Burress for the 2007 run. We know how his tenure ended as a New York Giant, not exactly, pretty much an unceremonious ending. And you look at the Odell Beckham Juniors of the world, the Giants historically are a franchise that basically are blue collar, have been hard-nosed, defensive-minded football, strong up front on both sides of the ball, and they didn't necessarily need that top 5 wideout or even running back to succeed. And I think that's where they kind of lost their way as an organization, and they seem to be finding that slowly but surely. And again, the big question is going to be about Saquon Barkley, because I don't question the talent, the ability whatsoever. I'm convinced if he can stay on the field and healthy, there's a spot for him in Canton in 10 years or whenever he decides that enough is enough. The issue is going to be his physical running style. He doesn't seem like a guy that shies away from contact. Everybody talks about the size of his legs, which are like tree trunks. To me, I see that, and I've seen a lot of running backs, whether Peyton Hillis, who the Giants, of course, signed late in his career, former Madden cover boy, or even Marion Barber, who I alluded to, these big physical backs, you don't see them getting 25, 30, 35 carries a game anymore. It's always a running back by committee type of situation. And again, I think the Giants just can't put all their eggs in one basket. That they have to continue building that offensive line forward. And I think Gettleman is doing that. my concern again is that you want everybody on the same page. Young quarterback, young up and coming offensive line, some defensive pieces that are starting to show signs of life. When you have a general manager right now that's maybe towards the end of his tenure, is he actually going to see this through the right way and not try to speed up the growing process too much and try to bring in too many veteran guys that when maybe they should still be building through the draft, and perhaps, yes, they miss out on the playoffs this year, but some of the fruit, their hard work starts bearing fruit in the next season.
Well, it's funny you just said that too, because in 2016, when they brought Ben McAdoo in, and 2015 is the year they had all those issues with losing games in the final seconds. The undefeated Carolina Panthers at that point, the undefeated New England Patriots at that point. You started off that season 4-2, and then all of a sudden the rails went off the hinges there. And then when McAdoo came in, Jerry Reese brings in a Damian Harrison. He brings in a JC was already there. He brings in a Janoris Jenkins. He brings in Olivier Vernon. He brings in these top level guys on defense, and they have a great season in 2016. And everyone kept on saying, playoff Eli, playoff Eli, playoff Eli. And then they had the boat ride situation where at that was the point right there where I felt McAdoo lost the team. That was that moment right there is when McAdoo lost that franchise, lost the handle of his franchise, lost the handle of those wide receivers who all took their day off and went on a boat ride, which was if you ever saw the TV show Ballers, there was that little scene in the opening season when they're all having that big party on the boat. Yeah. That's what I heard. That's what that party was like.
And it was just as big a disaster. And you hit on it, Randy. I mean, I was there for Odell Beckham Jr.'s rookie year, missed the first 4 games from the hamstring injury. Never struck me as a team first guy. People always knocked him for character issues or being a distraction in the locker room. When push came to shove, to me, Odell Beckham Jr. was about Odell Beckham Jr. I mean, where the Giants were winning Super Bowls, it was Eli Manning, who's one of the most selfless, down to earth. I mean, I could wax poetic on and on about Eli Manning and his character. Just look no further. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree with Archie Manning, who I've interviewed decently well, and of course Peyton. But when you have the supposed leader, and still Eli Manning was still the face of the franchise at that point, but you have Odell Beckham Jr. now, right before the playoffs, going on a boat with Sterling Shepard and Victor Cruz, and basically dropping the ball literally and figuratively in that game against Green Bay. That's something you're not going to live down. So to me, that along with that fight for Josh Norman, which I believe we were both there, Randy, in the press box against the undefeated Carolina Panthers at the time, and his reaction and how Tom Coughlin failed to discipline him. It was just one thing after another with Odell Beckham Jr. And you even see him in the news now claiming that this terrible pandemic, that he's immune to coronavirus. And I'm sure people in that Giants front office, they worship his talent. They think he's an otherworldly player. But when they read these back page stories about Odell Beckham Jr., all the distractions, I can't help but think they're relieved that they don't have to be on that PR team trying to figure out how to get a positive spin on it to keep the heat off the team and off Odell Beckham Jr. Because like I said, for me, he was the anti-Giant. He was everything that the Giants were not during their championship season. And once they turned the page from Odell Beckham, and I hate to put it on one player's shoulders, but when you put all the pressure in the world on him to be the guy, and he's not a team first guy, it sets a bad tone for the rest of the locker room.
Yeah, not only that, with you saying that, Gettleman came out and said, we did not, I have the transcripts too. I can always look it up right now. I get the exact transcript for him, but Gettleman made the comment, we did not sign Odell Beckham Jr. to trade him. And I don't think in their heart of hearts that they meant to, but you don't sign a big contract like Odell Beckham does and then start bad-mouthing the organization and expect to be there the following season. It's a disrespectful way of handling things with the Tisch family and the Mara family. And I think that they did the right thing by moving him. Do I think that there were probably a lot of offers? Do I believe that they shopped him around to more than just one team? Absolutely, I do. Do I think it was the right thing to do? Absolutely, because him with a younger quarterback. And look, Odell was very, very frustrated with Eli Manning. He said it privately. He did not like playing with Eli. It was not the type of quarterback that he wanted. He probably would have played better with a guy like Geno Smith when Geno was there. They said he and Geno were very close. Whatever the reasoning was, they re-signed Odell Beckham Jr. to a deal. They moved him to Cleveland for Jabril Peppers, who, let's face it, has not blown the doors off of the fan base, for the Giants fan base, but he's also they also received a draft pick, and I forgot who they ended up getting with that draft pick, but they
Well,
ended up
Olivia
making
Vernon came over as well, right?
Olivia Vernon was two separate deals. Olivia Vernon went over to Cleveland, and they bought back Zettler,
Right.
and
The
that
offensive tackle. Okay.
okay, so and listen, that was fine too. I had no problem with that deal too, especially with Nate Solder being out this year. Zettler has to become a leader, which Zettler's not used to doing whatsoever. Zettler is just a guy who wants to come in, punch card in, put his lunch pail down, do his job, stop for lunch, go finish his job, go home. Zettler's not there to be a leader. He's there just to produce. They brought Nate Solder in to be a vocal leader since he's been a world champion. And he's done a very good job with Will Hernandez, even though Hernandez, I feel this year has sort of taken a step back or two. That offensive line situation is not a situation that's going to get solved now. I think they're one player away. Nick Gates does not fit as the center there. That is not the right position for Nick Gates, but he's filling in and doing the best he can. Jalapeno not healthy enough to be doing to do the job, and that's why they cut him.
And the Giants have a saying that you're familiar with, Randy. It's once a Giant, always a Giant. And that applies to, all the way down from the equipment manager up until front office, as far as Dave Gettleman, who I believe is his second stint with the New York Giants. So if I'm confident about saying something, that Odell Beckham Jr. is one of the few former Giants that has burned enough bridges where we can safely say that a potential return as a player, certainly down the road, even as a coach, is pretty much ruled out for how Odell Beckham Jr. handled the situation in New York. And look, I mean, his rise to stardom was incredible. I thought it was unfair, of course, that miraculous one-handed catch that he had in a primetime game against the Dallas Cowboys. In today's day and age of social media, with that going viral and all the pressure in the world on him, and for him to be criticizing a two-time Super Bowl winning quarterback did not go well over with the media, didn't go well with the fan base. And I just felt, I felt again, and Jerry Reese, being there for press conference after press conference, the one thing with Dave Gettleman, you mentioned it, that he basically wasn't actively looking to trade Odell Beckham Jr., and he even said as much in that transcript. But when again, he's always ears open, eyes open. If the right offer came across, he pulled the trigger. Jerry Reese was never accountable and never took accountability for any mistakes he may have had, and he got time and time again grilled in front of the media. And frankly, he had, I would say, a surly attitude, was really, pointing the finger at everything else instead of pointing the thumb at himself. And I think that was his ultimate undoing with the Giants. And for me, again, I look beyond the wins and losses this year. You mentioned, Randy, 7 wins, maybe 6 or 7 wins. That could be good enough to win the division. What I see, and I have to just look at a body of work of coaches that have coached in the Bill Belichick coaching tree. Joe Judge, look at Bill O'Brien, look at Romeo Crennel, Charlie Weiss, on and on down the list. There's been very few coaches that have had any success in that Bill Belichick coaching tree. So to try to replicate what Belichick's done up in New England has proven nearly impossible. So I'm on the side of, I think Joe Judge could ultimately be a disciplinarian and a coach that is well respected. But given the track record of coaches that are coming out of the Belichick coaching tree, I'm not necessarily sold in the hiring just yet.
Well, and it's funny the thing too, you just said about Reese about not being accountable. At the end of every bye week, every year, Reese at least met with the media. You may not have believed everything he said. Gettleman last year, after during quite a few different instances, was not available to the media, and that to me is the thing is just beyond me at this point, because Gettleman needs to be in front of the camera. And when they asked him about that at the end of the season, he sort of played it off like, well, I didn't think it was the right place for me to be in front of you guys answering some of those questions that I didn't have the answers to. And we're sitting there saying, well, wait a minute, you have to have the answers for it. Like when you benched Eli, you needed to have somebody say something.
Yeah. I felt in some instances Jerry Reese did more harm than good. Even though he was visible, he did, set up press conferences and respond to media calls. He didn't have the accountability in that interview. He really was making more excuses than he was actually providing explanations. And Gettleman, look, I'm not going to make excuses for him. He should be more visible. He should be more available to the media. I tend to think as a guy that's 70 plus years old school mentality, he's not a social media guy. He's not going to be a rah-rah type of guy. He kind of wants to be behind the scenes, good, bad, or indifferent. Even when the things are going well for the Giants, he's not exactly, fielding phone calls from all types of reporters. So at least he's consistent with that he tends to shy away from the interviews. Whether it's right or wrong, you can debate it, but I think that's more or less his style.
Yeah, no, and I agree with that too. And I think that Gettleman, Reese, you know how sometimes when you can talk to somebody and you can feel that they may not be the smartest guy in the room.
Sure.
Gettleman dances around the topic enough where he makes you feel like he's educating you. Even though you know he's not 100% right, you feel like he's educating you. And that's it's a lost art with GMs. I remember when Pat Shurmur and Dave Gettleman sat up there and they drafted Daniel Jones. They were when every single one of us in the media room were sitting there saying, "This is the dumbest decision you could have made at this point in time. You passed up on a good quarterback. Sorry, on a good defensive player to take a quarterback when you could have tried to trade up." And from what Gettleman was telling us, they did try to trade up. They were talking to Jacksonville, trying to get that pick. So they can get Daniel Jones and Allen, so they can work both sides, and it just didn't work out. So we were all sitting there saying this is a terrible pickup, and then all of a sudden, just to show you how much the tune changed, when they made the decision to go with Daniel Jones over Eli Manning, and Daniel Jones came out and had that unbelievable game against Tampa. Everyone was like, well, Eli's secondary news, this is that, he's over there, over the hill. And then all of a sudden, when the losses started piling up, everyone kept on saying, so you're never going to go back to Eli? You could have used this as an experiment to see what he was doing. The reality was, after starting 0-2, they looked at that season and they said they knew this is not going to go anywhere. Eli was at 500. Let's let him walk away with let's put him down. Let's take him out to the barnyard and put old Yeller down, and let's just train him and let him learn from Eli while he's here. Yeah. And then Eli came back into the end of the year, played a close game against Philadelphia but lost, and then played Miami and won his final home game. There's no other way you could let Eli go out.
And it reminds me of 05 with Kurt Warner and Eli, of course, with the transition. Not an easy thing. We're seeing it right now with Ryan Fitzpatrick and Tua Tagovailoa. Ryan Fitzpatrick's not exactly pleased. He's not handling it with as much grace as Kurt Warner was, but clearly the Giants drew a line in the sand and said, we're moving on from Kurt Warner. Obviously, he's a veteran Super Bowl winning quarterback, and they did the same for Eli Manning, a legacy player, a guy that's going to be etched in the Mount Rushmore of all Giants players. And I think they made the right decision. Ultimately, again, when you look head-to-head in that draft class, for Sam Darnold, whether it's Baker Mayfield and Josh Allen and even Daniel Jones. I mean, Daniel Jones is right up there at the top of that list at this point in his career, even though he was drafted the year prior, I should say. He still is right neck and neck with some of the top young, second, third-year quarterbacks in the league. I put him right up there with the very best.
Well, and it's funny, too, with Daniel – you want to like him. You want to like him. He's got he's not personal. Like, he doesn't take anything personally. Very monotone, gives you the answers, the PR answers that you want him to give. But man, he just has to stop turning the ball over. But this is what a second-year quarterback was. You know what I mean? Look, Eli Manning came in the first season. They went 6-10. He came in during the Cowboy game. The following year, they made the playoffs. But Eli had issues with turning the ball over, just like every other second-year quarterback. The only difference is the Giants had a better defense at that point.
The shutout, 23-0 shutout loss at home to the Carolina Panthers, right, in his first playoff.
The first playoff game during his second season, and then the following year after that, Eli led all quarterbacks with fourth-quarter comebacks, and they ended up making the Super Bowl his third year. Not every quarterback has that opportunity. Mm-hmm. This season – look, Daniel Jones is going into his second season with a different head coach, and it's a different offensive coordinator. Pat Shurmur did a very good job of developing Daniel Jones to that point. It's now up to Jason Garrett and Joe Judge to take Daniel to that next level. I think because the same reasons we were discussing before, no spring to learn the system on the field, not much of a training camp, no preseason. First few games of the year, you're trying to figure out who's doing what, who's able to do what. Daniel Jones is not able to show what he's able to do as of yet. He's had some okay games this year, but I think the second half of the season, the rest of the season now, if Daniel Jones is going to be able to separate himself from being an elite quarterback in this league or just being another quarterback in this league, and he has exactly 10 games now to prove it.
and just be thankful Daniel Jones isn't in the situation that Sam Darnold is in with I call them the Florham Park Jets because they don't even deserve to be the New York Jets. Former assistant GM Bobby Marks of the Nets actually came up with that phrase. So I'll give him credit for that. But it's true. I mean, when you have, and not to get off topic, but Jason Garrett, I mean, he has his detractors, but he's not doing nearly the damage that Adam Gase is with the Jets to Sam Darnold, to a young quarterback. I think that Daniel Jones is on the right trajectory. We saw that Eli Manning, as you alluded to, turnover. He was plagued by turnovers for his first couple of years, and he fell into a perfect situation with a great offensive line, running game that could protect him, that he didn't. He had to manage the game and got playoff experience. I really think that Daniel Jones is the franchise quarterback, has some growing up to do, and has some basically ball security issues. Maybe the Giants, now that Tom Coughlin's out in Jacksonville, maybe they hire him as a turnover consultant, that just like he helped Tiki Barber with the high and tight, keeping the ball in, maybe he can give him some pointers and tips so that he won't turn the ball over in such critical positions. Because that's really, he has the arm, he has the smarts, he has the, as you mentioned, the corporate company line that he's not going to create a distraction for his team. He has all the makings of a franchise quarterback, a playoff quarterback, and a potential championship quarterback. It's the turnover bug that he's just got to solve that problem.
No, and again, too, not having Saquon Barkley there hurts them. Again, Devontae Freeman, I give Devontae Freeman so much credit for being able to come in here. Getting cut from Atlanta was probably a very devastating thing for him because of everything he was doing for that franchise. And now coming in and actually playing very well now for the Giants. Now that he's getting used to the offense, we're starting to see Atlanta Freeman, which was an all-pro. Let's see where this goes for the panning out. Now let's quickly transition over to the, as you see this beautiful background of our press box at MetLife Stadium, the other team that shares that press box, the New York Football Jets. And man, I got to tell you, like, you've been on more conference calls with them this year than I've been with the Giants. And what do you say at this point? What do you say if you're the Jets?
I mean, the Giants, say what you want to say about their recent downturn. Let's say since 2013, they've had sub 500 years with the exception of the playoff run under McAdoo in his second year. The Jets are an absolute disaster. It starts at ownership. Woody Johnson being an ambassador in the UK for the current presidential administration, the acting owner, his brother, Christopher Johnson, basically trying to put a square peg in a round hole. They hired Adam Gase at the recommendation of Peyton Manning, who, let's face it, if he's a head coach and Peyton Manning's the quarterback, I'm sorry, he wasn't even the head coach. He was the offense coordinator for the Denver Broncos, and Peyton Manning's the quarterback. How hard is that to basically sit on the sidelines with the headset while Peyton Manning makes all the calls at the line? I think, Randy, you and I have intermediate to maybe beginner football knowledge, and we could probably do that. So based on Adam Gase's track record in Denver, he alienated all the players in Miami. You look up and down the list, whether it's Kenny Stills, whether it's Ryan Tannehill, who now, coming off an AFC championship game with the Tennessee Titans, looks like he didn't even miss a beat in this offseason, this crazy pandemic year. Every player that Adam Gase coaches, leaves, and goes somewhere else ends up blossoming and getting better. So if that doesn't tell you all you need to know about this quote-unquote offensive genius, I don't know what does, because he is a detriment to Sam Darnold. He is a detriment to the offense as a whole. You don't see any creativity out of it whatsoever. And from what I'm hearing inside the building, too, is that basically ownership kind of forced this marriage between Adam Gase, head coach, and defense coordinator Greg Williams, that basically they're not, you can read the backstory. They have some family feuding that goes on in that relationship. They are not the best of buddies whatsoever, but they thought that based on Adam Gase's, let's call it quote unquote skill set, because I still question that, and Greg Williams, they thought that that was going to be a match made in heaven. It's been anything but that. This Jets defense that was top 3 in the league last year against the run has been absolutely atrocious. They're dead last in every statistical offensive, defensive category, and they're on a historical pace to become not only the worst team in football this year, but historically one of the worst teams to ever take an NFL field. It's mind-boggling, but if you follow Adam Gase's coaching career, it shouldn't be all that shocking. Well, maybe it's not that shocking to the fans, but to the Johnsons family, the ownership, it might be.
If you're the Jets, do you try and move Darnold and get some draft picks, or do you hang your hat on it, or do you just say, listen, let's fire the coach, let's get a new coach in here, and let's make some adjustments, and then go from there? Like, from my perspective, if someone blows you away with a deal, like if the Indianapolis Colts, who are renting Phillip Rivers for a year, come to you and say, we'll give you a second-round pick and a third-round pick for Darnold, I say you take it and run, because you'll be right there in the line for another rookie quarterback.
as long as Adam Gase is here, he's again in 1998, where basically he elected to the Jets were going to line up for the number overall pick. He basically didn't want to be drafted by the Jets, and I think Trevor Lawrence can't really blame him. Look at the dysfunction with the Jets. You know, he could potentially be going back to back as far as the national championship game with Clemson this year. You can't blame the guy for not wanting to be drafted by the Jets, and their hands going to be forced because they're going to have Sam Darnold, who I still think has potential. At this point, when you look at the two New York quarterbacks, I think that Sam Darnold is still behind the development of Daniel Jones, but he still is a franchise caliber quarterback the Jets have been chasing for 2 decades nearly. For me, I think you have to clear the coaching staff. You have to get rid of Adam Gase, of course. Greg Williams, who I honestly had high hopes for. I thought, in spite of how I thought the offense would struggle, you lost Robbie Anderson, let him go to his old college coach at Temple with Matt Rule. You Quincy Enunwa with injury, of course, and then was released. You didn't replenish the roster. I predicted a lot of the offensive struggles. Which has shocked me has been Ed Greg Williams and the ineptitude of the defense. And I basically really believe that he should be out the door right behind Adam Gase. And then the problem you have is you still have, let's call it a lame duck general manager in Joe Douglas that signed a 6-year contract with the New York Jets, which is just absolutely mind-boggling to me. I mean, it's not like you're bringing in Ernie Acosta or a guy that's won Super Bowls. This is a unproven commodity at the GM position, and he's amounting to what is Adam Gase's puppet. Trade Jamal Adams, trade Le'Veon Bell. He's basically Adam Gase is pulling all the strings like he did in Miami, except Joe Douglas is now executing it. So I believe the two of them are joined at the hip. You got to make a clean break, get them both out. And unfortunately, they had to eat millions of dollars for Le'Veon Bell's contract. They're probably going to have to eat some of that Joe Douglas money. But hey, you keep trying to swim out of quicksand, you're just going to keep sinking and sinking. They gotta get out of it, pay the piper, and move on.
Can't disagree with that too much. Before we wrap up here, again, you and I are both basketball guys too. I've always been a basketball guy before I've been a football guy. I know some people don't like to hear me say that, but it's the truth. So the Lakers just win the championship. We just got done with Bubblegate, as I like to call it, Bubblegate, and now we don't know when the new season's going to start. Yesterday, I sat in on 2 Zoom press conferences with the Indiana Pacers introducing their new coach. I also sat in for the Clippers announcing Ty Lue and seeing our good old friend Lawrence Frank there. And obviously, you're working on a project with a book about the history of the Nets. Now, you and I both have a lot of history with the Nets. Yours is a little bit different than mine. But I have to tell you, if there's ever been an NBA franchise that has been searching for an identity more than the Nets, I would love to know who they are, because like you're doing the research for your book right now, you had the Nassau Coliseum Nets, the Teaneck Armory Nets, the Continental Airlines / Brendan Byrne Arena / Izod Center Nets, and now the Brooklyn Nets. So far, from what you've dug up in your history for this book, what have you learned about the early years about this franchise?
What I've learned is that the New York Knicks, both when the original owner tried to move them to New Jersey, actually looked into Manhattan. They had basically the threat of a lawsuit for infringing on the Knicks' territorial rights. Then they settled on New Jersey, as you mentioned, the Teaneck Armory. And then after that, they went from the Teaneck Armory, of course, we know, to Island Garden Arena, Nassau Coliseum. They've had 8 or 9 different arenas in the history of the franchise. They've been vagabonds of sorts in the NBA, the ABA days and the NBA days. What I have learned is that the Nets were almost the redheaded stepchild of the ABA, and then they eventually earned respectability. And then they were the redheaded stepchild of the NBA, and then they earned respectability with back-to-back finals appearances with Jason Kidd in those early years. And then now, of course, with the third move now to Brooklyn, they had some down years, and now they're earning their way back into a potential championship conversation. So it seems like the Nets go in these, let's call it 10 to 12-year cycles of just abysmal basketball followed by championship quality play. And it's just remarkable to see. I've seen some of the low points and the high points, and I really predict this upcoming season to be a high point with Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and of course, Steve Nash, the new hired head coach, leading the charge in Brooklyn.
Of course, you know me being around the earlier Jason Kidd years. I still think that was probably going to be the best time in the franchise. Let's talk about Kevin Durant for a second with this Nets team. I call him the most sensitive superstar in sports because he is so in tune about what everybody is talking about him. How much, especially being in a New York market, does he need to not worry about everything that's going on around him and help just lead this team, especially since now they have a first-time head coach in Steve Nash and a very erratic point guard in Kyrie Irving.
Yeah, and that is the major reason why Kevin Durant signed with the Brooklyn Nets was less media attention. Of course, there's the dysfunctional ownership situation with James Dolan. A lot of Knicks players don't like the fact that the team trains in Westchester. Not many of them live in New York City, can't enjoy the New York City life. And Kevin Durant, and I'll put Kyrie Irving in that same mix, these are very deep, thoughtful, introspective, intellectual guys. They really are. And I think deep down, they are sensitive. And a lot of the criticism and a lot of the negativity sometimes does get to them. And people don't realize that. And we see this, Randy, being in locker rooms or even on Zoom calls now with the pandemic, that these are real, living, breathing people that listen to and hear and read all these things that are about them. And some athletes respond by using all that negativity and using it as a motivating force and proving all the doubters wrong. I think that if Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving at this stage of their career, these are not 22, 23-year-old guys. They're, approaching 30, in the case of Kyrie, 28, 29, Durant, 31. They are who they are. So you have to hope that Steve Nash, ultimate team guy, right? I mean, Kyrie Irving comes out and says, well, this can be a collaboration. I can coach the team one day. Kevin Durant can coach. Steve Nash can coach. And everybody said, oh, God, here goes Kyrie. He's undermining the coach already. And I can understand that because Kyrie did that exact thing in Boston. But if there was a guy that would be great for this team and for the egos and for the sensitivity level of Durant and Kyrie Irving, it's absolutely going to be Steve Nash. If you had a Greg Popovich type here, and I know Durant has all the respect for him in the world, these guys don't like to be coached hard. And it's hard to say as professional athletes and fans of the team, you want to see them coach and as hard as possible and put the best product on the court. They don't respond to that type of coaching. They need somebody to stroke their ego and to be able to, they need a day off or they don't want criticism. And I think Steve Nash can be a guy that's going to provide constructive feedback. He's going to be fair, but he has their respect and they know that he's not going to unfairly criticize them or get on top of them. So is it a perfect marriage? No, but I think a lot of people are already killing the Steve Nash hire before it pans out. I think from a personality standpoint, I think his personality meshes really well with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving.
My only issue with this is the same issue I had when Jason Kidd became the head coach of the Nets. From the difference is obviously Nash had a couple of years between when he stopped playing to when he's becoming a coach. Kidd went from being a player right to a coach. But my issue was when Kidd became a coach, he had Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, Jason Terry, Darren Williams, guys who he played against. He was coaching. And it's one thing to have respect for a guy because you went against him in the field of battle or the court, the game of, they went in battle with him on the court. But it's another thing to listen to him. And that's why when Jason was coaching Milwaukee, he had a bunch of young guys. Those young guys that he was coaching were guys who grew up watching him. So they'll listen to him because they have a lot more respect and want to learn from him. When you have a veteran team and you played against a guy and now he's going to be your coach, there's something missing there. And that's my only problem with Nash being the head coach of Durant and Kyrie Irving. Other guys who are only been in the league for 3 or 4 years since Nash has been out, it's a little different because they can lag on to Nash's greatness. But if you're going against this guy in the field of battles and you know what this guy is about, it's hard to really justify taking advice from somebody that you have more championship rings than he does for Durant's situation and Kyrie's situation. So that's just a perspective that I don't think a lot of people are looking at. And I think that's what made it even harder for me with Jason back in the day with Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett and Jason Terry and that crew. I know it's two totally different situations, but in some ways it's similar.
I tend to agree with that in some respects, Randy, because with Jason Kidd and Paul Pierce and Garnett and that crew, they were more peers than they were coach and player relationship, right? It's one of those situations where maybe they go out for a team meal afterwards or what have you. and maybe some of the guys, and those were veteran players at that point. So we, of course, know what happened with Pearson, Garnett, and Jason Terry, that they were over the hill at that point. The Nets had one of the slowest teams, the most defensively inept teams, even despite beating Miami, which is one of the shocking stats of all time, I find, is the Nets swept Miami in 4 games in that regular season, and that 2015 season. Then, of course, we know they went down to 5 games in the playoffs in that second round. All games closely contested. Joe Johnson battling plantar fasciitis. Of course, Brook Lopez was lost for the year. So a lot of things didn't go necessarily the Nets' way. And I thought Kidd did a tremendous job. I mean, that team was, I believe, like 8-18. They were 8 or 9 games under 500 at the quarter pole of the year, and they started to piece everything together and went on a great second half run to work their way up to the 6th seed and upset the Raptors. But I think there is something to that. I mean, Nash already reached out to Dirk Nowitzki to be his top assistant, and Dirk basically said he's so loyal to Dallas and Mark Cuban that he didn't want to go to any other organization, so he respectfully declined. There are reports that Mike D'Antoni could be on Steve Nash's staff, as well as Phil Handy, who's another respected assistant coach. So I think if Nash surrounds himself with enough veteran coaches, and look, I'll admit it, I am not a huge fan of Mike D'Antoni. I think his offenses have, revolutionized the game in the NBA with this open concept, and his teams that watching Nash and Stoudemire and Sean Marion during those early 2000s, mid 2000s were entertaining basketball. You see what happens when the Houston Rockets with James Harden and basically shooting threes until the buzzer goes off. There still has to be a place for the mid-range game in the NBA. I know it's all about flashy dunks and 3-pointers, but there has to be more to this offense. And I really think that that's a good question that you raised, Randy, is the accountability, the fact that are they going to look at Steve Nash as too much of a collaborator and not enough of a guy that they respect enough if they take bad shots or they make bad decisions that they're going to change their style of play. I think you're right. That remains to be seen.
Rick, why don't you let everybody know where they can find you?
Sure. Right now, I'm operating independently, so I'm writing for netsinsider.com. That's NETS insider.com. Also at Amazing Clubhouse, like the Amazing Mets, so amazingclubhouse.com. And as Randy mentioned, very exciting, pulling together a book on the history of the Brooklyn Nets, the 58 years right now, 52 years, I guess I should say. And it's a wacky, wild, and oftentimes strange journey that I'm finding. And I think just for general basketball fans, it'll be an interesting read once it comes out in basically the fall of 2021.
Well, Rick, I appreciate you giving me some time today. I know we said 20 minutes. It's been 47. So I always I always appreciate it. And tonight we have Giants postgame, my friend.
Yep. Yeah. And it'll be exciting. Any prediction, I'll throw it out there. I do think the Giants are going to be close. I think it's a field goal game. I hate to say it, I think Daniel Jones is going to make a late game gaffe, a turnover. Again, another growing pain. It's going to give the Eagles a chance to win the game on a field goal, and they will. And I hate for Giant fans to have flashbacks to the Dallas Cowboys a couple of weeks ago, but that's what I see for tonight, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, here's the funny thing. Daniel Jones, starting record as a quarterback is not a good one, but he is 3-0 against Washington, and he's, it's not pretty. So basically, with that being said, I believe his record, he's won 1 game this year and 3 games last year, so he's 4 and a lot.
4 and a lot. Yeah.
4 and a lot. So
yeah. And like you said, I mean, with Eli Manning, we could have counted the first couple of years of his career. He probably didn't have a great record against the rest of the NFC East, the rest of the NFL. But once Daniel Jones, if he gets to the playoffs, they go on a deep playoff run, dare I say a Super Bowl, all this will be forgotten. Giant fans will be kicking themselves for even questioning a guy like Daniel Jones. Just gotta kick this turnover habit, and I think he'll be in a good place.
No, listen, Rick, I agree with you 110%. You can find me at Randy BSP on Instagram and Twitter, of course, backsportspage.com. I handle the Big Blue Report for the New York Giants. Check me out later on after the game tonight, and we'll talk to everybody soon. Thanks again, Rick Laughland. Appreciate it.
Anytime.